The day my parents threw my bags onto the driveway, they were grinning. That should tell you everything you need to know about them. My name is Georgina. I'm 31 years old, and up until 7 days after my grandfather's funeral, I genuinely believed that love at its most basic level meant something in my family. I was wrong. But what I discovered in the weeks that followed, that changed everything. Not just for me, but for them. My grandfather, Edmund, was the kind of man who chose his words like a chess player chooses his moves. Deliberately, patiently, always 3 steps ahead. He had built a logistics empire from nothing, raised a family, and in his final months, he lay in a hospital bed watching the people around him reveal who they truly were. My parents revealed themselves quickly. They didn't visit much, business trips, social events, the usual excuses. But I was there every Tuesday, every weekend, sometimes just sitting in silence because silence was enough. I held his hand. I listened to his stories. I made sure his medication schedule was followed when the nurse changed shifts. I wasn't doing it for anything in return. I just loved him. Grandpa saw all of it, and he never forgot. The morning before his funeral, he asked to see me privately. His voice was barely above a whisper by then, but his eyes, sharp and clear as ever, told Methi's wasn't a casual conversation. He pressed a small brass key into my palm, heavy, old-fashioned. The kind of key that locks something important. Then he handed me a business card, Arthur Pendleton, private attorney. When the time comes, he murmured, go see Arthur. Trust no one before that, promise me. I promised. I didn't ask questions. I just held his hand a little tighter, and I kept that secret buried deep until the moment he took his last breath. The funeral flowers were barely beginning to wilt when my parents made their move. I was still living in the family home, a temporary arrangement since I'd been caring for Grandpa full-time. I woke up on a Thursday morning to the sound of my father dragging my suitcases across the floor, heavy canvas bags, thudding down the hallway like dead weight. I stepped outside and watched him hurl them onto the gravel driveway. The handles cracked against the stone. One split completely. My mother stood on the porch, arms folded across her chest, wearing a designer blouse and expression I can only describe as triumphant. My father turned to face me, and the contempt on his face hit me like cold water. You spent years living under this roof, pretending to care about him just so you could stay comfortable, he said. Let me be very clear, the estate, the business, the properties, the $20 million, all of it belongs to us. You are a parasite, Georgina. And today, we are finally cutting you loose. He walked back inside. The oak door slammed, the lock clicked, and my mother smiled. Here's the part they never saw coming. I didn't cry. I didn't knock on the door. I didn't beg. Because beneath the sting of that moment, beneath the humiliation of standing in a driveway with cracked luggage and no plan, I felt something strange, calm. I quietly loaded my bags into the trunk of my car, started the engine, and pulled out of the driveway. In my rearview mirror, I watched the front curtains move. My mother was already pouring champagne. They thought the story was over. It had barely begun. I spent that night in a motel room off the highway. Neon sign blinking, paper-thin walls. The kind off place that makes you feel invisible. But I wasn't thinking about any of that. I was thinking about Grandpa's key, about the quiet certainty in his voice when he said, "Justice will prevail." I held that brass key in my hand in the dark and thought about the man who had spent his final months not just saying goodbye, but building something. Quietly, carefully, brick by brick, a trap. And my parents had just walked straight into it. The next morning, I drove to Midtown and found the address on Arthur Pendleton's card. The office wasn't glamorous, no marble foyer, no floor-to-ceiling windows. Just clean, quiet, and authoritative in the way that real power tends to be. Arthur was already at his desk when I arrived, Athic-bound folder positioned at the center like it had been waiting for me. He stood when I entered, shook my hand firmly, looked me in the eye. "Your grandfather told me a great deal about you," he said. "Please sit." He opened the folder, and the world shifted. Grandpa hadn't divided the estate. He hadn't split things fairly or left room for negotiation. He had left everything, the full $20 million, the lakefront properties, the investment portfolio, every single asset exclusively to me. I was the sole heir. I sat there in silence as the magnitude of it settled over me. But before I could say a word, Arthur raised one hand. "There's more," he said, "and you need to hear all of it." He reached into his desk drawer and placed a second folder on the table. Stamped in red across, cover confidential. Forensic records. He used the brass key to unlock a steel box beside his desk and set a thumb drive next to the documents. "Your grandfather didn't just want to protect his fortune," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a careful, deliberate tone. "He wanted to make sure they could never challenge you, and to do that, he had to expose a truth he'd been sitting on for years." What was inside that folder made my hands go cold. Years ago, when Grandpa's logistics company was thriving, my parents had been quietly stealing from it. Systematically. Meticulously. Hundreds of thousands of dollars redirected into private offshore accounts to fund a lifestyle they hadn't earned. But they didn't stop there. When Grandpa's doctors first flagged a minor heart condition, my parents saw an opportunity. They bribed a medical assistant to falsify his records, to document severe cognitive decline that didn't exist, so they could force him out of his own company and seize full control. They tried to erase their own father's mind on paper. Grandpa found out. He didn't confront them. He didn't call a lawyer or threaten them. He started gathering evidence. Quietly. Patiently. For years. Every bank statement. Every transaction. Every shred of proof tucked away and waiting for me. Arthur flipped to the final section of the legal folder, and a slight smile crossed his face. The kind that belongs to someone who has watched a very long plan finally arrive at its conclusion. Grandpa hadn't just written a will. He had engineered a mechanism. On paper, he left my parents something too, a corporate logistics entity, heavily implied to contain valuable family assets. At first glance, it appeared to be a generous share of the legacy. It was a beautifully constructed illusion. The company was hollow, tied to $3 million in unresolved debt, back taxes, and every legal liability connected to their past crimes. Grandpa had quietly consolidated their entire fraudulent history into one single entity and gift-wrapped it with their names on it. The mechanism had one rule. If my parents accepted the estate distribution without contest, the shell company would dissolve quietly. No harm done, no exposure. A clean exit. But if they challenged the will, if they came after my inheritance, if they tried to block it or manipulate it in any way, they would legally trigger full personal ownership of that toxic entity. They would inherit the debt, the liability, the criminal exposure. They would sign their own financial death warrant. And by throwing me out of the house, by racing to list Grandpa's properties and put down deposits in luxury cars before the will was even read, they had already pulled the trigger. The day of the formal reading, my parents walked into Arthur's conference room like they owned the building, tailored suits. A corporate attorney in tow, expensive, sharp, and radiating the kind of arrogance that comes from always winning. My mother glanced at my plain clothes and whispered something to my father. They both smirked. Their lawyer slid a document forward, an early estate draft, outdated, irrelevant. He was already smiling when Arthur Pendleton opened his briefcase. That smile lasted about 45 seconds. I watched it dissolve in real time, the color draining from the attorney's face, his hands stilling on the page, his professional composure crumbling as he read the ironclad final document and understood what it meant. My father leaned forward. "What is it? Read it out loud." The attorney's voice came out hollow. Shaking. "This document is legally binding and supersedes all prior drafts. Georgina inherits the full estate, all $20 million. A pause. "You inherit the logistics shell company." Silence. Then the reality of what they had triggered, every greedy decision, every cruel calculation, every act of manipulation, crashed down on them all at once. The collapse was swift. Unable to absorb the debts attached to the shell company, my parents were forced into bankruptcy within months. The house they'd lived in for decades gone. The cars repossessed. The social circle they'd carefully built on the illusion of wealth dissolved overnight. Federal investigators came next, drawn in by the forensic records Grandpa had so methodically preserved. The embezzlement, the falsified medical documents, all of it finally laid bare. They are currently under active criminal investigation. I used Grandpa's legacy the way he would have wanted. I bought a home, quiet, comfortable, mine. And I established the Georgina Legacy Foundation, an organization dedicated to providing legal defense and financial protection for elderly people being exploited by the very family members who should be protecting them. Every case we take on, I think of him. Of a man who faced the deepest kind of betrayal and chose, instead of anger, to be methodical. Who spent his final months not in bitterness, but in purpose. He didn't just leave me money. He left me a lesson in what it looks like when patience, love, and quiet intelligence outlast cruelty every single time. Now I want to hear from you. If you were standing in that driveway with cracked luggage and a locked door behind you, what would you have done? Drop your answer in the comments. You for watching until the very end.